Well, greetings everyone. Thank you for allowing us a little time off for our annual vacation. Julie and I really enjoyed a trip around half the country, it feels like, getting to see family and friends. And we're back and ready to go. And we're just thrilled to be home and with our church family in whatever ways we can, whether it's through YouTube here or whether it's in person at church. So thank you for that time away. And God has blessed us in bringing us back, and we're ready to go. I had some time during our vacation time to, allow the Lord to impress me as to what we should be talking about, what I should be speaking about in the weeks ahead. And He impressed me to go to Matthew 5 and talk about the Beatitudes. These blessed are statements that Jesus made at the beginning of His preaching ministry. So I wanted to talk about those things for the next few weeks, and I've entitled this Happy Thoughts because the Beatitudes are about happiness. All right, and this first message is called Happy and Humble. You'll see why as we go from here. So I want to invite you to please pray with me as we get started. Lord in heaven, thank you so much for these few moments we can share together. Bless our time. May your Spirit speak to our hearts and move us closer to you. Help us to appreciate who you are and who you want to be in our lives. And we thank you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, ask 100 people what they want out of life, and 75 of them will say, I just want to be happy. Ask that same 100 people what it means to be happy, and 90 of them will say something about people, places, or things. And the answers will range from living in the right house to having the right job, from being loved and appreciated to feeling financially secure. Others might say things like having the right spouse or having healthy children, We might even hear a few answers that have to do with fame and fortune or maybe achieving our goals in life. Regardless of the answers that we hear, we are obviously soon confronted with the reality that happiness seems so temporary. It seems so fleeting. It seems so dependent on our circumstances, doesn't it? And too often we discover that happiness depends on whatever the conditions are that surround us, or on whatever people in general are around us. Whoever's around us, whatever's going on in our lives, that will dictate our happiness. Yet there's always that moment of truth when we realize that all that we've accumulated, all that we've attained, all that we've accomplished and achieved has not made us happy. And we find ourselves asking the question, why am I not happy? We all long to find the secret of true happiness, don't we? A happiness that withstands the ups and downs of life, the storms and the trials that inevitably come our way. We want happiness that lasts, happiness that no discouragement, no frustration, no grief, no disaster can destroy. We want that kind of happiness, don't we? But the more we search, the more we discover that happiness is not an external characteristic. Happiness isn't dependent upon those circumstances of life that change so frequently. We soon discover that happiness is an inside job. Know what I mean by that? It begins inside us, in our hearts. And it's that kind of happiness that Jesus came to give to us. A happiness that's on the inside. Phil Robertson, he's a patriarch of the famed Duck Dynasty, the Robertson clan of the Duck Dynasty on television. He coined the phrase, happy, happy, happy. Maybe you've watched it. I haven't watched much of this, but he was obviously in the news and picked on a lot for his faith. And those three words were a description of the life that he lives. That phrase even became the title of his best-selling autobiography that tells the story of his life from romping and stomping and ripping to a life that's filled with faith and family and ducks. Phil's going to tell you that the secret to his happiness comes from his deep-seated faith and from his relationship with Jesus Christ. He's shameless in sharing his faith. He's unashamed to talk about what brings him joy in his life, that being his relationship with Jesus. And like Phil, if we're going to discover the keys to happiness that begins on the inside, we have to return to the teachings of Jesus. I find it incredibly interesting that when Jesus began his earthly ministry, when he began to teach, his first teaching was about happiness. We find those earliest teachings in Matthew 5. That's why I've chosen this for today, and actually for this whole series. And we call these early teachings of Jesus the Beatitudes, the beginning of Jesus' long monologue on what his kingdom looks like. And his is a kingdom that looks very much different than the one that his first century hearers would recognize. It's very much different than the kingdom that we live in too, isn't it? Listen to the context that Matthew sets for us, and then listen for the first key to happiness that Jesus reveals in the Beatitudes, the one that we'll look at today. Matthew 5, 1-3. One day, as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. God blesses those who are poor and realize their need for him, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, you might not remember it in this wording, but you might recall the more familiar wording of verse 3, where it says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." You remember those words? Jesus sees this multitude, and seeing them, he sees their suffering. He sees their anxiety. He sees their worry and their fear. He looks across this sea of faces and he sees into their hearts. He sees their deepest desire. And you know what it was? A desire for happiness. So Jesus sits down. Now, understand that anytime a rabbi or a teacher just sat down in ancient times, it was in essence an exclamation point. He was announcing to his students that he was about to say something really important, very important. And Jesus begins with these words, "Blessed are," or if you like the King James Version, "Blessed are." Now, what does it mean to be blessed? Well, biblical scholar William Barclay, who wrote a commentary on the Bible that helped me through university years ago, William Barclay translates that phrase, "blessed are," into "oh, the bliss of the man." Blessedness and bliss. How do we get happy from that? Follow me for a moment. To find its meaning of what it means to be blessed, we need to first trace the Greek word that's translated into English. And the Greek word for blessed is Makarios. My Greek teacher was Hispanic, and so everything I say in Greek seems to sound Spanish. But Makarios, Makarios, which is a Greek adjective that means happy. Now, when we think happy, we most often think of joy and pleasure, right? In fact, Webster actually defines happiness as lucky, fortunate, having, showing, or causing great pleasure or joy. But Webster's definition and our feeble minds miss the meaning that's really contained in this simple Greek word, Makarios. Makarios was used in ancient Greek literature to describe the state of the gods. It meant sufficiency. It meant satisfaction. It meant security. It's interesting that the Greeks called the island of Cyprus the Happy Isle. Maybe you've heard that term. It was this Greek word, Makarios, that they used for happy when they described that island. And the reason was they referred to Cyprus as the Happy Isle because it was completely self-contained. It was completely secure, meaning a person would never have to even leave the coastline of this beautiful island for anything. It was a happy place. It was sufficient. It was secure. The blessedness that Jesus speaks of in these words is that blessedness that is completely untouchable. It's completely unassailable. It's something that no circumstances, no disappointments, no tragedies, no cares. It's something that none of those things can take away. The Beatitudes speak of that joy, that contentment, that peace that shines through our circumstances, shines through our whatever goes on in our lives, good or bad. We are still blessed, and we have that peace. It's more than a little shocking, though, when we discover that Jesus says the first secret to this happiness is to be poor in spirit. That's kind of strange, isn't it? We don't like that word poor. The words poor and happy don't belong in the same sentence, do they? Fat and happy, now there are two words, they go together. But poor and happy, that's a paradox, isn't it? So what on earth could Jesus mean? There are two Greek words, we won't go into them specifically, but these two Greek words are both used to describe the word poor, but they are different definitions. They're different descriptions. One word carried the meaning that, yes, a man was poor, but he wasn't destitute. You know, it just meant that he had to work for his meager living. He lived paycheck to paycheck. Does that sound familiar to you? Never having much, never saving much, but always just getting by. That's what one of the Greek words for poor meant. And then there was the Greek word that described abject poverty. You know, it described the person who had absolutely nothing and was helpless to do anything about it. And that's the word that Matthew has placed on the lips of Jesus, but Jesus wasn't really saying that the happy person was the person who had nothing at all. However, that definition was used. Jesus said that the happy person was the person who was poor in spirit. So what does it mean to be poor in spirit? In Jesus' wording, it meant that a happy person is a person who realizes their own helplessness and who then puts their trust not in themselves, but in God alone as the solution, as the fulfiller of their needs, you see. And every one of us, speaking that way, speaking spiritually, is helpless before God, regardless of our place in life. It doesn't matter. We could compare our situation to two men who each owe $1 million. And one man has $1,000 and the other one has $10,000, but neither of them has enough to pay that debt, you see. It doesn't matter how rich or good looking or talented someone is, how entitled someone is, and none of it matters. We all owe God. Being poor in spirit is simply knowing that, you see, regardless of your station in life. It's me knowing that I owe God a debt I cannot repay. And the same goes for you. That's what it means to be poor in spirit. And when we realize our poverty of spirit, we're then able to turn loose of things like circumstances, all those circumstances and all that stuff that we had hoped would bring us happiness. Those things we thought would bring that to us. And we're able then to grab onto God, grab hold of God. We realize that things mean nothing and that God means everything and that He is our only hope. And don't misunderstand here what I'm trying to say. Jesus is not saying that abject poverty is a good thing. I hope I'm making that clear enough. On the contrary, physically speaking, in the real physical world, Jesus would never have called blessed people who are living in slums or people who don't have enough food or clothes and whose health is rotting away. He wouldn't call them blessed. Physically speaking, He isn't calling them that. As a matter of fact, those are exactly the conditions that Jesus calls on us in the Gospels to address and to correct, aren't they? That's His way of balancing life, right? If you have much, you give to those who have little, and you do it freely from your heart. You don't have it ripped from you like governments like to do, you know? And that's God's way of those who have, helping those who have not. Jesus calls on us to do that, but He wouldn't call them blessed until we have blessed them. That's why it's quite a burden that God gives to us. If I could squeeze the idea of being poor in spirit into one word, that word would be humility. That's our word for today, humility. What Jesus meant was that happiness is rooted in humility, in a person's deep inner self, in their spirit. Humility is not a matter of physical poverty at all. Has not little to do with it. Humility isn't self-humiliation. It's not saying, oh, I'm just a nobody. That's not at all what Jesus was speaking about. Humility is simply seeing our need before God, who we are in relation to God. Jesus is talking about that invisible, immortal part of us, created to respond to and to be infused by the Spirit of God. Humility opens our hearts and our lives to the miracle-working grace of God in Jesus Christ, you see. It connects us, it interconnects us with God in a dependent way. And it allows us to cry to God for help whenever we need it. There's a parable Jesus told in Luke 18 that I think helps to explain this. It's about an encounter between a Pharisee and a publican. You remember that story? You remember the Pharisees, don't you? You know, these self-righteous people, the religious snobs of the day, if you will. And then the publicans, well, let's just say that they were despised. They were the despised traitor class who sold out to the Romans in the first century. And in Jesus' story, each of these men, both of them, went up to the temple to pray. And the Pharisee prayed this way. Essentially, he said, I thank you, God, that I am not a sinner like everyone else, especially like that tax collector over there. I never cheat. I don't sin. I don't commit adultery. I fast twice a week, and I give you 1/10 of my income. But then the publican prayed, and refusing to even look up to heaven, he beat his chest and he said, Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner. And Jesus said it was the publican who left justified that day for his humility. And then Jesus went on to say, you might remember, for the proud will be humbled, and the humble will be honored. You see, Jesus was promoting humility as a source of our joy. What was the Pharisees' problem? Well, it was the same thing that keeps you and me from enjoying the happiness that God wants for us, and we could call it spiritual pride. Thinking that we need to arrive before God can bless us. The Pharisee was sufficient to himself. He was adequate in his mind. Spiritual pride says I can pull myself together. And once I pull myself together, I can then present myself to God. Spiritual pride says I have to be right before I can go to God. But my friends, God doesn't seek entry into our lives through our achievement. That's not how He comes into our lives, by us being good enough. It's quite the opposite. See, it's easy to give God the praise and the credit and the glory for all of the gifts and the graces and the talents that we've been given, isn't it? It's easy to acknowledge all that we've accomplished while God's guiding presence was upon us. What's more difficult is giving to God all the aching problems and all of the terrible circumstances. What's more difficult is thinking if I just prayed more, or if I were more spiritual, I wouldn't have these feelings of resentment and heartache and discontentment, right? No, we need God in the failures of life, in the tragedies of life, much more than we need Him in the successes of life. This is what Jesus was calling us to, humility. Humility is confessing that fact, that we need God, regardless of our station in life. And Jesus says how happy you are when you admit how much you need me. Lloyd Ogilvie, who was at one time chaplain of the United States Senate, he puts it this way: happiness is the freedom to holler help. You have freedom to holler help. You know, it doesn't mean you're a failure when you holler help. It means that you know where to look. You know who to hold on to. You know that your success and your joy doesn't come from yourself, but it comes in complete dependence upon God your Father. That's what it means to be poor in spirit, having the freedom to yell help. And then in closing, I just want to share the words of this poem, and I'm sorry that I don't know who the author was, but the words I found quite striking, and I just would like you to read along as I share this with you, because I really think it speaks to our point today. Jesus went up on the mount that day to begin His ministry. He gazed across the fertile ground, and what did He see? He looked upon the countless faces. He saw the pain of unnumbered homes and the doubts of 1,000 places. His view was not limited to what He saw that day. He looked across eternity, and He saw you, me, and oh, so many others along the way. God's grace He shared with words that day. Happiness can be found no other way. The path is found in humility, when you know your own poverty. Not poor as the world defines, but poor before God, He chimed. When in life you've found this key, Jesus said you've found eternity. So when you think your life a mess, don't despair. I do declare, Jesus came to bring you happiness. Doesn't that make sense? Being poor in spirit means possessing a spirit of humility. Bowing, humbled before God is the first key to happiness. We'll look at more in the weeks to come. Jesus says, though, that's what makes us happy, happy, happy. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for the joy that you long to give to each one of us. We are grateful, Lord, that you went to such great lengths to secure our peace, our contentment, our joy. Lord, help us to face the reality of where we stand before the Almighty God of the universe, not to think little of ourselves, for we know how much you value us. But Father, help us to see that the solution to our discouragement, our challenges, our circumstances is not found in fixing them ourselves, but in giving them to you. So bless us toward that end. We thank you for this time and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope to see you next week, either at church or right here on YouTube. God bless you.